going to do is work through three other categories. In terms of doing this kind of contextual work, I'll signpost you for those who want the scholarship. There are lots of books, lots of articles, lots of case studies that you can engage with this further. I'm just giving you an overview of some of the things that you may want to take on board. The second area, I think we're in the second or the third area, the second area, but we've gone through, this is the third area, is gender. 85% of the people in our pews in Britain are women. And it's even a higher proportion if you're looking at black churches. It could be 90%. 95% of the people in the congregation are women. It's a bit of a crisis for two reasons. One, because I don't think the kingdom of God is just about the women doing the... I'm trying to be inclusive. But I hear what you're saying. Listen. I hear what you're saying, because I've got 8 sisters. I hear what you're saying. Don't trust me, so I'm with you on that one. The question is, it's a crisis, not only in terms of the congregation, crisis in terms of leadership, because how can you have 85% of the congregation being women of colour, and have what, 4, 5, 6% in terms of leadership? It's a crisis. It means either two things. It means either God is not calling women, or the hierarchy are blocking women. And I would say, for me, I've got 8 sisters, so I know where I stand. It's the hierarchy. I'm not just saying that because I've got 8 sisters. It's the hierarchy. There's a problem, isn't there? If you have all these, and it gets worse. When I do this in Pentecostal churches, I say it as it is. I say the tragedy is this: we've got all these highly educated, talented women being led by mediocre men. It's tragic. It's tragic. It's tragic. And then they say to me, how do you know they're mediocre? I can tell you how they're mediocre, because some of them couldn't study with me. They couldn't reach the bar necessary to get started. But miraculously, 2 years later, they turned up with a PhD from some dodgy American university. That's what I mean by mediocre. They were not doing the work. They didn't want to put the work in. So, it raises a question. If we are going to engage with second and third generation African diaspora communities, with churches, we've got to recognise we've got to empower the women. It's got to be hip-hop. It's got to be ladies first. We've got to recognise that these are the children of the mothers and fathers who have done the hard work in the church, who did the cleaning, did the cooking, did all the menial tasks to often make sure that the church could function effectively, and they're still with you. They're the ones who saw their parents, grandparents marginalised, disadvantaged, not get the opportunities, and they're still with you. People are precious. So I would suggest, and one of the things that I've encouraged, obviously our students do this work in terms of theology. When I work at Queen's, we have 70 black MA and PhD students at Queen's, largest cohort of black PhD students anywhere in Western Europe. All of them entangle womanist theology into their work, because we recognise you can't do theology in the community without the skills that empower black women. End of story. How do you do that? You take seriously issues around race, issues around class, issues of gender. We used to call it multidimensional analysis back in the 80s. We now call it intersectionality. Due to Kimberly Crenshaw's work, talking about how all of these factors entangle to either advantage or disadvantage simultaneously. And so we have to take this. If you've not done any work on womanism, here's a 30-second intro guide to womanist theology.
Are you a feminist or a womanist? A question a lot of black women will inevitably ask themselves while they're exploring feminism. Is womanism just feminism rebranded, or is there a little bit more to it than that? Well, in this video, I'll be explaining and exploring what is womanism. Womanism is a term coined by Alice Walker, who famously wrote the novel The Color Purple. The term first appeared in her book In Search of Our Mother's Garden, Womanist Prose, published in 1983. She created womanism to center black women in a feminist movement that largely benefited middle-class white women. While black women also benefited from the feminist movement, their contributions weren't acknowledged, and thus womanism was created. Because white women are often seen as the standard victims of sexism, feminism tends to be very white, and rarely considers how black women specifically deal with being black and female. This often means black women participating in larger feminist movements tend to feel as though they have to choose between fighting against racism or sexism. Often because of the erasure of black women within the feminist movement, black women participating in feminism sometimes feel like they have to fight against the racism among feminists who don't see the need to include critiques of white supremacy in their fight against gender oppression. These feminists are referred to as white feminists, not necessarily because they're white, but because their feminism really only seeks to serve white women, while actively overlooking black women. And that's been consistent through the history of feminism, where black women were often asked to stand in the back of the line while white women asked for their rights first, and considered the goals of black women to be antagonistic to their own. Alice Walker defines a womanist as a black feminist or feminist of color, a woman who loves other women sexually or non-sexually, and sometimes individual men sexually or non-sexually. She is committed to the survival and wholeness of all people, male and female. She isn't a separatist, except periodically for her own health. She loves music, dance, the moon, the spirit, and loves love, and food, and roundness. She loves struggle, her people, and most of all, she loves herself. It's important to know that while womanism is about loving and appreciating black women and critiquing the classist and racist aspects of white feminism, it's also about supporting and empowering black men, who are often integral parts of a black woman's life and family. When it comes to differentiating between womanism and feminism, Alice Walker says, womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender, meaning that there are only slight differences between being a womanist and being a black feminist. Womanists largely do support the larger feminist movement and their ultimate goals, but have carved out their own space to specifically censor black women, whereas black feminists tend to do the same, but seek to work within the existing feminist movement and structure.
So now, Pentecostals like that, except when it gets to the sexuality bit. Oh no! Oh no, we're not going down that pathway. So within the black feminist theological movement, the womanist movement, there are splits over issues around human sexuality. There are those who are more on the liberal side, those who are more on the conservative side. So just to be aware of that there are womanists who don't necessarily agree with everything that there is. So how do we then take these ideas and transform them into theological thought? Well, womanist theologians have done this work in North America, beginning to do this work within Britain by focusing on the issues that confront black women in the church and society and reflecting on them theologically. Asking critical questions. What does God have to say about those of us who find ourselves 2 times removed by race, removed by gender from opportunities? What does God have to say about the fact that often it's the men who get foregrounded, their issues, their concerns? How do we get some kind of equilibrium here? And that was in the early days. We're now into the 3rd wave of womanist theologians. I mean, these are really super duper smart people, like Princeton, Harvard. Yeah, I mean, these people are off the chart in terms of braininess, doing some serious critical theological work on the lives of black women in relation to the Christian tradition. There's a wealth of material. There's so much material on womanist theologians, my students don't know who to cite. It's a huge field. You cannot ignore, cannot evade this material. If you went to theological college and did not engage with womanist theology, somebody was messing with you. Honestly, somebody was hiding some stuff from you. Because how can you be engaged in a Christian context that's predominantly black women, women of colour, and not be reading, teaching, reflecting based on this material that's rooted in their lives, their experiences, their understanding? Some serious stuff going on. As you can see, I'm really critical of theological education. I think a lot of it basically does not... Well, look, it is what it is. It's an apartheid tradition. That's what it is. It really is. In Britain, it is about maintaining whiteness in theology. Even the experts will say that. That's what it is. We've got to do some work in terms of dismantling it. Unless we out it, can't pretend to just go away. They out it and say the way it is. Can't move on. One of the ways in which on the album we attempt to deal with this, I worked with that. This is an earlier version because I couldn't get the newer version to fit into this. We produced a song called Magnificat. And what we wanted to do was look at Mary's song. And Mary's song works within the tradition of the great reversal. The higher brought down, the lowlier lifted up. And we asked a choreographer, this was great, so I went to a dance school. Said, look, we're going to do this song on the Magnificat. And we said, how can you, listen, we're going to do it through modern dance. He says, okay, fair enough, you know what I meant. I knew the hip-hop stuff, but the modern dance, so this Small sisters are going to do the most. I'm going to be Nanny of the Maroons. And so we've got a rapper called Justice Williams, went to a Pentecostal church back in the day, now works in the music scene in London. Listen, we want you to produce read the scripture and respond to it. She wrote a rap about these fantastic black women in church history and how blackness for her was not to be denigrated or marginalised, but was central to the plan of redemption. Not that it means other people's cultures, histories, genders, they're not, but she wanted to recenter it rather than having it marginal, to produce a critique. So we got her to do the rapping on it. And then we went to a filmmaker. These are all Brummies, you know, and all people that you know 2 degrees from, because everybody's looking their favour in Birmingham, you know what I mean? I heard you making a film. Yeah, I got a cousin, you know. My cousin was a filmmaker, you know. So we got this cousin of a friend, and she said, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make the film for you, but it needs something else. And I said, tell me an issue that concerns black women that we can fold into this narrative and work within the tradition of the Great Reversals. She said, colorism, natural hairism, all of those issues are issues that pervade our existence. We know it's big in schools. I went to a secondary school the other day, and the teacher said, we've got no problems here in terms of attainment. It's the colour wars. It's a shadism that's being played out with the young people in particular. So we made a music video, and anybody who knows their reggae music, if there's any reggae music, hardcore reggae, dancehall fans in, well, you know, there's only one genre ever produced in reggae music just for black women. What was it? There you go, Lovers Rock. So we made a Lovers Rock tune. There you go. I tell you what, you need to pray for these people, because if they know all this stuff about lovers, I'm just joking.
I believe we need to hear more women's voices in public life, in particular for the next.
Oh, that's Rose Hudson Wilkins. We have her weaving in and out of this as well.
Generation. If we're going to change the dynamics of what we have today, where it is still sort of a man's world, then women today need to step forward to enable their children and their grandchildren, in particular girls, and actually boys too. Boys need to see that their counterparts can be equally respected in terms of the contribution that they bring to the table.
Luke chapter 1.
Yeah, God bless woman. Has the most powerful God to the miracle of me. If only God what can done. Oh, in the ladies, oh, in the girls, cause God is chosen you to save the world. Oh, let the women of the earth feel like virgins to know your word. If take him and do some powerful sitting, him scatter force people. God alone ruler after them I throne and lift up people when nobody never thinks them matter.
I said it's time for action. I'm slavery chain to the chain reaction. Oh yes, I'm a fighter, resistor, a daughter, a sister. I am a fraction of progress. Some don't lift the finger, but I ride the storm like the queen and singer. Because all through the process, trust me, it's mommy that knows best. Yo, we need justice and equal rights. For the rest in peace when we sleep at night. Fight for the children, the youth and abuse them, the world of confusion, and also we lose them to the streets. When no one keeps their eyes out for them, no one to protect or vouch for them. Let's reach out to the mothers of the earth. We want to give back, let's show what we work.
In get hungry people, all eat up good sitting. But rich people, in send them with them too long hard. God and you servant them Israel. It never fit for that time for them.
Ladies, oh, in the girls, cause God is chosen you to save the world. Oh, let the women of the earth feel like virgins to know your word. Armed with a pen and a paper and show mine. I read for those who couldn't, and there was a long line. I'm sure poor, the sky ain't the limit. A jungle sometimes, I got a panther spirit. A widow without a husband. I'm free minds like Harriet Tubman. The fact is, they deported and killed the activists, but they're a part of us, so we are attached to this. Teach us always to use like a Nancy. Defend our people like the queens of Ashanti. Bridge the gap for future generations. Download our history, make our own stations. So many things left to be said. and so many books left to be read. We need to wake up the mentally dead. We need to lead so we won't be led.
For young women today who say that politics is not boring and not for them, I would like them to think of politics as something that is going to impact on their lives, whether they like it or not. So in other words, they will need to ask themselves, do I want to just sit and have something done to me? Or do I want to be right there at the cutting edge, making decisions, contributing to the decisions that are going to impact on society of which they are a part?
I wanna shout out all my womanists, Valentina Alexander, Caroline Redfern, Dulcie McKenzie, Maxine Howell, and Lynette Mullings. Let's go.
There we go. There we go. So just the dub section there, we'll leave that bit out. But you see, what we're trying to do, you see, is weave in, you see, the genre created specifically Dennis Bovard in the early days of reggae, this is bashment, and we've got to go back to sound system culture, introduce this genre. What we're trying to do then is foreground the experiences, the histories of black women to say, listen, this stuff matters. You matter in the eyes of God. In fact, you should be up here doing the work rather than just down there. Or, when I go to Pentecostal churches, I would say, how come all the women just doing all the singing? What if we go to heaven and where are the black people going to be? Cooking, cleaning, singing. I don't know if that's good enough for me. Might get to the gates and say, I don't know, it's an alternative. But maybe it raises questions. How do we talk about being inclusive if the only spaces we prepare for black women are body spaces? Physically cleaning, physically doing the music, the stuff that was, this is why the historicization work is important. You read Caribbean history, that kind of stuff is problematic because that's what they're expected to do. So when my daughter says, can I go and do the music? I said, no! That's going to do the preaching. You're just doing the music. That's not that you can't sing. But I'm saying, hold on a minute. Is this what we've come to? So I've raised questions about it. It's in my book. I've got a book coming out in the summer called Decolonizing Gospel Music. I've raised that question, particularly in churches that are mixed. Because they'll tell you they're inclusive, but when you see the black people are positioned, it's in stereotypical places. Well, where are the black people? They're doing the singing. Because that's what we do. Raises questions. Because if you don't see them as sources of knowledge, going back to the black philosophy tradition, you don't see them as having cognitive, intellectual skills, what else can they do except the singing and dancing? And we're meant to be showing the world outside that we're different. Raises questions. See, you can see why they don't invite me back, can't you? See, I only do one gig in one place and they say, next time. He's got a cousin, it's a bit milder. It's all right. It's all good. 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 The fourth issue then is the easy one, social justice. If you're doing any kind of work with young people, especially African Caribbean, it's the buzzword. You can't do anything without social. I've been on so many marches with my kids this year, I'm tired. I should have lost more weight, to be quite honest, because this is all they do. When's the next month? Well, we're going. It's environmental. We're going. Issues of race. We're going. Issues of everything, because for them, you cannot talk about this stuff. You've got to be actively engaged in changing it. You've got to be out there. You've got to be a transformer. This is quite difficult for Pentecostal folk because Pentecostalism is a colonial Christian tradition, colonized twice. Colonized first by Western missionaries, went to the Caribbean, colonized secondly by Euro-American missionaries. They said two things to African people in the Caribbean. Don't think about your faith. We'll do the thinking for you. 400 years later, we still don't end up at theological college. And they said the second thing is, you can't change the world. 400 years later, we don't do social justice. So we've got to move against, we're doing this with Pentecostal, we've got to move against the traditions. We've got to decolonize our faith in order to arrive at a position where we can see social transformation as mattering. Now, why don't we do this? Two other reasons I think are fundamentally important, which slow people down. The first is, there isn't often the moral courage. Social justice requires courage. First march I went on to was me. We had a racial attack in Birmingham, 1989. This guy was beaten up by this gang. Black community up in arms. We're going to have a march. It's 4 of us and a cat. Turn up on the mountain. My goodness. I realised. You know, my dad said, reflect on King. He said, go back to Birmingham, Alabama. Went back to life of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King rocked up in Birmingham, Alabama. So about 6, 7, 8 ministers who followed him went to prison. They had to bomb the church before the church came out. They shedding of blood before people actually realised it was important to do this, to support King in that way. It takes moral courage. You have to be willing to travel through the valley of the shadow of the death in order to tear down the principalities and powers. It really does require moral courage. You know, it helps sometimes if you have a camera. Or say to people when we're doing filmmaking, when we took on the BNP, they were going to beat me up. I had a cameraman there. Where did he step them? I tell you what, they did beat us up in Bradford though. They didn't care there. Those young people, they didn't care. They still kicked our heads in. But anyway, that's another story. But the camera didn't matter. So I say to people when we make films, having the camera there can make a big difference in terms of having the courage. When the camera isn't there, it's still important to have the moral courage. One of the reasons why I do prison work. Because I think, if Jesus says, when I was in prison, and you didn't visit, I've got to be there. Sometimes it's terrifying. There's some crazy people in prison. You know, I was a liberal before I started studying criminology. When I actually met real criminals, I became a conservative. Lock them up. What did you do? Drive them out, beat them up, chop him up, bash him, wickedness, fire among you. It really challenges your liberal sensibilities. I did criminology in North America. My first degree was American University. They're very rich, you see. People would die and leave money to the university. Our prison course, our criminology course was team taught in prison. So every other week we went to a maximum security prison. It took an hour to get in, which was worrying because I thought, I'm going to get out. How to get in? To get processed. Sit down with me. Why are you in here? I killed 3 people. Why did you kill them? Was it the strength theory? Because you felt you couldn't get this world's good legitimately? Were you from a broken home? Were you traumatized? No, man, I just want to kill some people. I want to have some fun. Keep him locked up! Don't let him out! Get this! Turn you into a real conservative! You know, in terms of but the point of doing it for me was courage. Working with hard to reach young people, young men in particular, because we lock up poor men in Britain. How do we then tell them, this demographic, about that it takes a lot of moral courage? First time I did prison work, because Birmingham prison is where I started doing prison work in the early noughties. Terrifying. Go in there and you're Pentecostals, my spiritual radar was, oh my goodness, feel the devil in here. You know what I mean? You know, have courage. Fear not. First thing I did, I'm not going to be intimidated by these people. I started doing it because I lived opposite a bail hostel and they kept nicking my stuff. So I thought, listen, never will get to the source. Went in the room. And in Birmingham prison, because the guards, there were no guards, they put you in a room, they lock the door, and they give you a buzzer. They say, if anything happens, buzz it, and we'll come. You think, well, it's taking about half an hour to get here. What's going on? So I went in. I remembered my acting days at school. You see, it's always worth doing acting at school. You see, you missed the maths lesson if you did acting. You see, so I did acting class. The buzzer, I took the buzzer off, threw it in the corner. I said, listen. I said, who's the baddest man in here? Who's the baddest man in here? And somebody said, so-and-so, because they killed the police officer. That's not the baddest man in here. I said, who's the baddest man in here? He said, so-and-so, because he's a big gang man. I said, it's not the baddest man in here. And they go through this, who's it? I said, me. I said, why? I said, because I can walk out at the end of the day. The baddest man in here. I'm going to show you what makes me so bad, that I can come in here, do this stuff, and leave. They went, yeah, it's true. And I thought, my goodness. They're rolling with me. They're rolling with me. Because I got rid of the buzzer, you see, which was a signifier. I'm not here to, the state isn't protecting me, something else is protecting me. You know, there are men from that class who went to university. Here's the funny thing, I won't tell you who they are, because some of them don't like talking about it. Some of them are from that class and now in the ministry. Right? Courage, moral courage. It helps as well if you're a bit thick, you don't really see the danger. Moral courage. Why don't we do this work? Because of the moral courage. Second reason why we don't often do it is because of the cultural literacy. We don't want to learn the culture, learn the language, something that you have to be willing to do to engage with the next demographic. I'm talking about offenders. There's also a privileged demographic. My kids have a very privileged life, but it's still a case of me doing the cultural literacy. I spend hours listening to K-pop with my daughter. To K-pop. Now that's torture. You listen to that stuff, but it's great because what I keep saying is, oh, Kool and the Gang did that 20 years ago. Oh, that riff, listen, that's Jay-Z was doing that riff 6 years ago. So she doesn't let me listen anymore. She says, you spoiled it for me. You're always saying that somebody that said it's not me. I'm saying it's not in it. I'm trying to learn the language, the cultural literacy. To engage, we have to be willing to do that kind of work. One of my PhD students who works with young men disaffected across the city of Birmingham, I had to learn the language because he'd come in and start talking street talk. I mean, it got me where I realised I didn't know what he was talking about. He's talking about bleach. He says, oh, bleach. What's he talking about bleach? In the classroom, I didn't realise bleach was for somebody being killed. Is this also bleach? Somebody? I was thinking, it's talking about the toilet. It's talking about the toilet. What's going on? You know, but it says to us, we've got to do some learning. And it's not that you're never too old to learn. I engage with my daughter's stuff. I engage with the stuff that's happening in terms of popular culture. Just because I want to find at least a pathway to engage. You know, and when you get old enough, you can be the crazy uncle, dad who says stuff because at least they'll remember it 20 years' time. You know? So the moral courage becomes important. And here's the good news is we serve a God who says that we shouldn't live by fear.
Amen. I've
not given you a spirit of fear, but of love, of power, and of sound mind. And that's really important if you support Coventry City like me. Fearful days that we've had in the past, I can tell you. So it matters. The social justice, what I try and do in documentaries, exorcism, in that book, is show how we use film to then engage with social justice. We took on Cadbury. Cadbury told us for years in Birmingham there was no child labour in their cocoa in Ghana. Lie. People would come from Ghana and say, there is child labour. They're lying. We hustled £40,000 worth of funding to go and legally check everything. So you go after Cadbury's, you go after the gold company, Anglo Gold Ashanti, you go after the World Bank and the EU. Listen, I mean my wife's got enough weapons to resist those people. They come after me for £40,000 doing the research to make sure everything was in place. We went out there, made the film, went out on Channel 4. To their credit, Cadbury sent 2 representatives to visit me when I was teaching. They said, we'd like to see your documentation. It's not a problem. Spent 40 grand on this, all legal, no problem whatsoever. They looked at it, to their credit, they went fair trade 18 months' time. That policy lifted 2 million children out of poverty. Right? So we did it with the film, we did it with the film. We did it go with the camera, it's a lot easier. But it is about saying, we will not allow evil to flourish. We will do whatever we can to resist it. And the moral courage, the literacy, for me, it's never, the question has never been the resource. The question has been the level of faith that one is willing to commit to make things happen. So the social justice matters. It is the language, 2nd, 3rd generation, 4th generation African Caribbean communities. It is the easiest way to engage young people. If Christ is lifted up, for me that means now social justice is there. People can see that God is a God of inclusion around race, class. Can see the church is not only doing the welfare, food bank, after school club, some advocacy work, but is also doing the structural, the social justice work, speaking truth to power, confronting the authorities, challenging the injustice, dismantling the architecture of oppression. They're doing that work as well. It draws young people to you. Honestly, I've been doing this work long enough to know, because I have a waiting list of people who want to study with me. Well, I can do social justice work. It's great. I can pick and choose now. And I can't. It's even Pentecostal, because you think, my goodness, what if they get to heaven? What if God judges me for not taking this person? I was always taking them on anyway. But the point I'm making is, it is the, whoops, there you go, come back up. We'll come back up in a second, there you go. Oh, there you go, it's currency, we attempted to translate this in popular culture in Birmingham in a couple of ways. Because in Birmingham, 5 years ago, across the road from a Pentecostal church, there was, we had a big issue in Birmingham with these gentlemen's clubs. Birmingham's got more gentlemen's clubs, these pole dancing clubs than anywhere else in the UK. And I know it's Birmingham, my goodness, what's going on. One of them opened opposite Pentecostal church. So I said to the pastor, what are you going to do about this? It's a great opportunity for social justice. And he said, well, what do you say? I said, look, you can do some of the crazy Pentecostal stuff, because we like this. You can do some of the, get all the young people together, join hands, and pray in tongues. So let's see what God does. That's what we do. See, crazy stuff works. Because he said, Robert, I didn't want to risk the crazy stuff because it's Eastern European mafia in there who are trafficking young women. I said, well, even more so. I said, let's do some kind of thing. He said, I'm not prepared to do it. So we thought, okay, let's try another way. So I wrote a drama about it. It's on BBC Regions. It's called Jesus Piece, if you know your hip hop, know your game, West Coast rapping. The game, the game has an album called Jesus Piece. We named it Jesus Piece. It's about a pastor who is faced with that exact same dilemma, but chooses to act. What we wanted to do was change the imagination of the pastors, the clergy. Look, we can think. Let's transform the Christian imagination. Let's look at what could be possible. So we wrote that. It stars Soweto Kinch, the jazz musician. He's also on the. I was going to name drop. I should have said Winton Marsalis. I'll bring him in later. But we went to Soweto Kinch, the jazz musician, to star within it. And we made a music video to retell the story as we thought it should have happened. Now this is an earlier version. Not everything in it is correct. There's a few errors in it, but the newer version I can't configure and get on this. So I'm just going to play you it. It tells the story of what happened, but we foreground the women, because I think it would have been different if it had been the women who had been leading that church.